You're going to die out here and nobody's going to stop. Marcus Walker said it to himself, not to her, because he'd stopped believing anyone would. His Harley was dead on the shoulder of a road that had swallowed 3 hours of his life, and the sun didn't care. Then a beat-up sedan slowed down. A woman he'd never met stepped out with the only bottle of water she owned and pressed it into his hand like it cost her nothing. It cost her everything. Comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. Now subscribe because you don't want to miss what happens next. The thermometer outside the gas station 40 miles back had read 114 degrees, and Marcus Walker was fairly certain it had climbed since then. He stood beside his Harley Davidson, its engine ticking as it cooled from a problem that was well beyond ticking cool, and he watched the heat rise off the asphalt in waves that bent the horizon into something almost unreal. He'd been a member of the Hells Angels for 19 years, 42 years old, 6'2", a beard that had gone iron gray before he'd turned 40, and arms sleeved in ink that told a story most people were too afraid to ask about. He was used to being looked at. He was not used to being looked at kindly. Cars passed. He counted them because there wasn't much else to do out here besides count and sweat and wonder if his phone would hold a signal long enough to call for help. 14 cars, then 22. A family in a minivan slowed down enough for the kids in the back seat to press their faces to the glass, and then the father hit the gas like Marcus was something contagious. "Yeah," Marcus muttered to no one. "Keep driving." He didn't blame them, not really. He knew what he looked like standing on the side of an Arizona highway, patches on his vest that said things people didn't understand and didn't want to. A stranger's fear was easy math. Big man tattoos, motorcycle club insignia alone on a desert road. Nobody did the algebra past that. He'd learned a long time ago not to expect anything different. What he didn't expect, what nobody could have prepared him for, was the small gray sedan that eased off the highway a quarter mile down and rolled to a stop on the gravel behind his bike. Marcus straightened up. His hand moved out of pure habit toward nothing in particular, just an old reflex from years of learning that surprises on the road were rarely good ones. The driver's door opened. A young woman stepped out. She couldn't have been older than 27. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had wilted in the heat, wearing a faded t-shirt with a diner logo half cracked off the front. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than one afternoon. Tired in her shoulders, tired around her eyes. She didn't look at his patches. She didn't look at his tattoos. She looked at his face and she said, "You've been standing out here a while, haven't you?" Marcus blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think you want to stop here." "I didn't ask what I wanted," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite a joke, but wasn't quite serious either. "I asked if you needed help." "I've got a dead bike and a phone that's got 1 bar," Marcus said slowly, still waiting for the moment she'd realize her mistake and get back in the car. "AAA doesn't come out this far." She nodded like that was information she could use. Then she walked to the passenger side of her car, opened the door, and came back with a single plastic water bottle. Half the label had peeled off in the heat. It was the only bottle in the car Marcus could see that from where he stood, because there was nothing else on the seat behind her but a purse and a folder of papers. She held it out to him. "Take it," she said. Marcus stared at the bottle like it was a foreign object. "That's yours." "I know." "You don't have another one, Tim." "I know that too." She pushed it closer. "You've probably been out here longer than me. Take it before I change my mind and drink it myself out of spite." There was something so plain and unguarded in the way she said it that Marcus felt something shift behind his ribs, something he didn't have a name for yet. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you help me?" She looked at him for a long moment like she was deciding whether the question deserved an honest answer or a joke. She chose honest. "Because you look like someone who needed someone to stop," she said. "That's it. That's the whole reason." Marcus took the bottle, his hand thick-knuckled and scarred from a decade of engine work and a few decades of things he didn't talk about, closed around the plastic like it might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. "I'm Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." "Marcus." He hesitated, then added Marcus Walker. "Well, Marcus Walker, you should probably call somebody before you fry out here." She glanced at the sky like it had personally offended her. "I'd offer you a ride, but I've only got room for 1 more person and about 90 pounds of anxiety in this car, so..." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus laughed. A real laugh surprised out of him. "I appreciate it," he said, "more than you know." "Don't mention it." She was already turning back toward her car. "Seriously, don't. It wasn't a big deal." "But it was. Marcus watched her get back in the sedan, watched the tires kick up gravel dust as she pulled back onto the highway, and he stood there with a bottle of water sweating in his hand, feeling like something enormous had just happened in the middle of something small. He didn't know yet that Emily had given away the only water she had left for a 6-mile walk home because her car had been running on fumes for 2 days, and she didn't trust it to make it to the next gas station and back. He didn't know that she'd spent the last of her cash that morning on a copay for her mother's blood pressure medication. He didn't know that when she got home that night, she'd sit on the edge of her bathtub and cry for reasons that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a life that had been squeezing her tighter every month for 2 years running. All Marcus knew standing on that highway with the sun finally starting its slow descent was that a stranger had looked at him and seen a person instead of a warning label. And it broke something open in him that he didn't know how to close back up. Each time. It took another hour for a tow truck to find him driven by an old-timer named Ruiz, who'd been hauling disabled cars off this stretch of highway for 30 years and had in that time developed exactly 0 patience for small talk. Marcus didn't mind. His mind was elsewhere. "You look like a man who just saw a ghost," Ruiz said, hooking up the Harley. "Something like that," Marcus said. He thought about Emily the entire ride back into town. He thought about the tired lines under her eyes, the way she'd handed over her only water without a flicker of hesitation, the way she'd brushed off his gratitude like it embarrassed her. Most people who look at Marcus saw the vest first, the patches, the name of the club stitched across his back in red letters on white. Hell's Angels, a name that carried 60 years of reputation. Some of it earned, most of it exaggerated by people who'd never met a single member. He'd stopped trying to explain a long time ago. You couldn't argue somebody out of a fear they'd built their whole life around. Emily hadn't needed an argument. She just hadn't been afraid in the first place. By the time Marcus got his bike back to the garage that evening, the story of the woman with the water bottle had lodged itself somewhere in his chest and refused to leave. He rode back to the clubhouse 2 days later once the Harley was running again. But something about him had changed, and the men who knew him best noticed it first. The Iron Horse Chapter's clubhouse sat on the edge of town, a converted warehouse with a gravel lot full of motorcycles gleaming under string lights, the low hum of conversation and old rock music drifting out into the desert evening. Marcus walked in and found his usual seat at the bar, and Daniel Hawk Reynolds, the chapter president, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that missed nothing, took one look at him and set down his drink. "You've been quiet," Hawk said. "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." Hawk leaned back on his stool. "Something happened out on that highway. Heard your bike went down near mile marker 60. Marcus turned his glass in a slow circle on the bar, watching the condensation ring spread beneath it. "Somebody stopped for me." "Somebody stops for you all the time, brother. You're 6'2" and covered in ink. People either stop to gawk or stop to sell you something." "Not like this." Marcus finally looked up. A woman, young, alone, stopped in the middle of nowhere for a man who, by every reasonable measure, should have scared the hell out of her. Hawk's eyebrows rose slightly. "And she gave me her last bottle of water." Marcus said it slowly, like the weight of the sentence needed time to land. "Her last one, Hawk. I could see it. There wasn't another bottle in that car. She was driving out in that heat with nothing left for herself, and she gave it to a stranger." The bar had gone a little quiet. A few of the other members, Tiny, a barrel-chested man, who'd been riding with Hawk since before Marcus joined, and Reese, younger, quieter, still earning his full patch, had turned to listen without quite pretending not to. "Why?" Tiny asked, voice low and gravelly. "I asked her that," Marcus said. "She said I looked like someone who needed someone to stop." Nobody said anything for a moment. "That's it?" Reese finally asked. "That's it." Marcus stared into his glass. "Do you know how long it's been since somebody looked at me and didn't flinch? Didn't cross the street? Didn't lock their car doors, didn't call the cops just because I was standing somewhere minding my own business?" His jaw tightened. She didn't even blink. Hawk was quiet for a long moment, studying his friend the way he studied engine trouble, carefully, patiently looking for what was actually wrong underneath the obvious symptoms. "You got a name?" Hawk asked finally. "Emily Carter." "You know where she lives?" Marcus shook his head. "Somewhere outside town. Small place, I think. She mentioned a diner shirt probably works there." Hawk nodded slowly, and something passed behind his eyes that Marcus recognized because he'd seen it before on nights when the club decided that some debt needed to be paid and some wrong needed correcting. Somebody who does something like that for a stranger, Hawk said quietly, and asks for nothing back. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's rare. That's the kind of thing this club exists to protect. I don't even know if she needs protecting, Marcus said. Everybody needs something, Hawk replied. The question is whether anybody's paying attention. It took Tiny less than 3 days to find out more than any of them expected, and none of it made anybody at that bar feel good. He came back to the clubhouse on a Thursday night, sat down across from Marcus, and didn't waste time on small talk. Emily Carter, he said, 27, works 2 jobs waitressing at the Sunrise Diner off Route 9, cleaning offices 3 nights a week on top of it. Lives with her mother in a rental about 6 miles outside town. Marcus leaned forward. Go on. Mother's got a heart condition, serious one. The medical bills have been piling up for 2 years. I'm talking real numbers, brother. Numbers that would break most people. Tiny slid a folded piece of paper across the bar, and Marcus didn't open it because he already understood the shape of what was inside it. Car's on its last legs. House is 1 bad month away from an eviction notice. And get this, she hasn't missed a single shift in 8 months. Not one. Even when her mother had a bad episode and ended up in the ER at 2 in the morning, Emily was back at the diner by 7 for the breakfast rush. Jesus, Reese muttered. That's not even the part that got me, Tiny said, and something in his voice had gone rough. I talked to a couple of the regulars at that diner. Every single one of them said the same thing that girl never complains. Never once. She smiles at people who are rude to her. She covers other waitresses' shifts when they're sick. She tips out the busboy from her own pocket when a table stiffs her. He shook his head. She's drowning, and she's still trying to keep everybody else's head above water. Marcus sat back slowly, feeling something cold settle into his stomach. She gave me her last water bottle, he said quietly, and she's got nothing left for herself. Hawk had come to stand behind the bar, arms crossed, listening to every word. When he spoke, his voice carried the particular weight it took on when a decision was already half made in his mind. You know what that means, don't you? He said. Marcus looked up. That means somewhere out there, Hawk continued, is a woman who gave away everything she had to a stranger who terrified half the town, and she did it without a second thought, and she's still out there right now exhausted, scared, probably wondering how she's going to make rent this month, and not one person besides us even knows her name. The bar had gone completely silent. So what do we do? Reese asked. Hawk's eyes moved slowly around the room, settling on each man in turn before they landed back on Marcus. We do what she did, Hawk said. We stop. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake in the back room of the clubhouse, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers Tiny had brought back through his mind like a rosary. Medical debt, a car that wouldn't survive another Arizona summer, a mother whose heart was failing while her daughter worked double shifts to keep the lights on. And through all of it, Emily hadn't complained once. He thought about the way she'd shrugged off his thanks on the highway. Don't mention it. It wasn't a big deal. As if kindness that size was something you were supposed to apologize for. He thought about his own life before the club, before Hawk had found him at 23 broke and directionless and angry at a world that had never given him a fair shake and told him that brotherhood meant something, that loyalty meant something, that a man could build a family out of the people who chose to stand beside him even when blood family had walked away. He thought about how it had taken 19 years and 1 bottle of water to remind him what that actually felt like from the other side. Around 3 in the morning, he got up, walked out to the lot, and sat on his bike in the dark, looking up at a sky full of more stars than most people ever bothered to notice. I don't even know you, he said quietly to nobody. To the desert, maybe to Emily herself, wherever she was sleeping or not sleeping, 6 miles outside town. But I'm not going to forget what you did. He didn't know yet how far that promise would travel. He didn't know that within 2 weeks, it would ripple out from 1 clubhouse in Arizona to chapters in 3 other states. He didn't know that somewhere down the line, hundreds of engines would roar to life because of 1 plastic bottle of water and 4 words spoken by a woman who thought she'd done nothing worth remembering. All he knew sitting alone in the dark was that some debts weren't about money. Some debts were about being seen. And Marcus intended to make sure Emily Carter never felt invisible again. The next afternoon, Marcus rode out to the Sunrise Diner alone. He told himself it was just to see her again, to thank her properly, maybe to leave a decent tip on a plate of eggs and get out before he made things awkward. He told himself a lot of things on that ride that turned out not to be entirely true. The diner was a squat building with a faded sign and a gravel parking lot, the kind of place that had been serving the same regulars for 20 years and didn't much care about anything else. Marcus parked his bike near the door, and the moment he stepped inside, he understood the truth of what Tiny had told him. Every table was occupied by regulars who clearly knew Emily by name, and she moved between them with a tired but genuine warmth, refilling coffee, remembering orders before people finished, asking, laughing at a joke from an old man in a booth by the window, even though her eyes carried the particular hollow look of someone running on fumes. She spotted Marcus the moment he walked in, and her whole face shifted surprise first, then something like careful pleasure. "Well, look who's still alive," she said, walking over with a coffee pot in hand. "Guess the water worked." "Guess it did." Marcus sat down at the counter. "I wanted to say thank you properly. Didn't feel right just driving off." "You already thanked me," Emily said, pouring him a cup he hadn't ordered. "On the highway. Remember I told you not to mention it." "I remember. I'm choosing to ignore that instruction." That got a real laugh out of her, small but real. "Stubborn. You have no idea." She leaned against the counter for a moment, glancing toward the kitchen window, where an order was waiting, clearly running calculations in her head about how much time she could spare. "You find somebody to fix your bike." "Yeah, good as new." Marcus studied her face, the exhaustion under the smile, the way her hands, though steady, had a faint tremor of someone who hadn't eaten enough that day. "You doing okay?" Something flickered behind her eyes, quick guarded gone, almost before it appeared. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly, too practiced. "Just a long week." "Every week's a long week for you, isn't it?" Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. Emily's smile faltered just slightly, just for a second before she rebuilt it. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The diner noise continued around them, clinking silverware, the hiss of the grill, a radio playing something forgettable, but between the two of them, something had gone very still. "You don't know anything about me," Emily said finally, and there was no accusation in it, just a tired kind of truth. "You met me for 5 minutes on the side of a highway." "I know you gave away the last thing you had to a stranger," Marcus said. "I know that means something about who you are, even if you don't want to talk about it." Emily's jaw tightened. For a moment, Marcus thought he'd pushed too far, said too much, overstepped a line that a 5-minute highway encounter hadn't earned him the right to cross. Then her shoulders dropped just slightly, like something in her had been holding its breath for a long time, and finally let a little of it go. "My mother's sick," she said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen to make sure nobody was listening. "Heart condition, getting worse. The bills are—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It's not your problem." "Maybe I want it to be," Marcus said. Emily looked at him, then really looked the way she had on the highway, except this time there was something sharper in it, something almost defensive. "Why, she asked. "Why does a stranger on a motorcycle care what happens to me?" Marcus thought about the question longer than it probably deserved. "Because you stopped when nobody else would," he said finally. "And where I come from, that's not something you forget. That's something you pay back." "I don't need anybody to pay me back," Emily said, and for the first time there was an edge of something almost fierce in her voice. "I didn't help you so you'd owe me something. That's not how it works." "I know," Marcus said gently. "That's exactly why it matters." Emily opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, unsure how to push back against a logic that didn't have an obvious flaw. The bell over the diner door rang, and a new group of customers walked in, and Emily's attention snapped back to her job with the automatic reflex of someone who couldn't afford to be distracted for long, no matter how much she might have wanted to be. "I have to get back to work," she said. "I understand." Marcus stood, pulled out his wallet, and left far more on the counter than the coffee cost. "Marcus, that's too much." "It's not," he said simply. "Take care of yourself, Emily." She watched him walk out with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and confusion, and a wariness that told him she wasn't used to people showing up in her life without wanting something in return. He didn't blame her for that wariness, but he intended to prove her wrong about it. That night, back at the clubhouse, Marcus told Hawk everything: the heart condition, the crushing bills, the pride that made Emily insist she didn't need help even as the exhaustion in her eyes told a different story. Hawk listened without interrupting the way he always did when something mattered. "She's not going to accept help easily," Marcus said. "She's proud, doesn't want pity." "Good," Hawk said. "We're not giving her pity." Then what are we giving her? Hawk's eyes had that look again, the one that meant a decision had already crystallized into something unstoppable. We're giving her what she gave you, Hawk said. We're giving her the feeling of not being alone. Marcus frowned. How do you plan on doing that without her finding out and shutting the door in our faces? We're not going to hide it, Hawk said. We're going to show up, all of us. Every chapter that owes this club a favor, every brother who's ever needed somebody to stop for them on a bad day. We're going to make sure that woman never has to wonder again whether kindness gets remembered. That's not a small thing you're talking about, Hawk. No, Hawk agreed. It's not supposed to be. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, not quite relief, not quite excitement, but something close to both. He thought about Emily's tired eyes, the tremor in her hands, the fierce pride in her voice when she said she didn't need anybody to pay her back. She was about to learn that some debts got paid whether you asked for them or not. But it would take more than one conversation, more than one clubhouse, more than one man's gratitude to build what was coming. It would take weeks of quiet work, phone calls between chapters that hadn't spoken in years. Old favors called in brothers who'd never met Emily Carter, agreeing to ride hundreds of miles for a stranger simply because one of their own had told them she mattered. And somewhere outside town, in a small rented house with peeling paint and a car that wouldn't survive another summer, Emily Carter had no idea that a debt was being built in her name, a debt made of engines and leather and loyalty, one that would eventually roar down her street with a force she could never have imagined. She only knew that a strange, gentle man on a motorcycle had looked at her like she mattered. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him either. Neither of them knew yet just how far this was about to go. Word had a way of moving faster than any man on a motorcycle, and within 4 days of Hawk's decision, that word had already crossed 2 state lines. Marcus was the one who made the first call, sitting in the back office of the clubhouse with a cracked leather notebook full of numbers. He hadn't dialed in years, brothers, from chapters in Nevada, in New Mexico and California, men who owed the Iron Horse chapter favors going back a decade or more. He didn't lead with the favor. He led with the story. There's a woman, he said over and over to voice after voice on the other end of the line. 27 years old, works 2 jobs. Mother's dying by inches from a heart condition the family can't afford to treat. And when she saw a brother stranded on the highway in 114 degrees, she gave him the last water she had. Didn't ask who he was. Didn't care what patch he wore. Just saw a man who needed help and stopped. Every single time the silence on the other end told him the story had landed exactly where he wanted it to. She got a name, asked a voice out of Barstow Gravel Rough, belonging to a man named Cole who Marcus had ridden with exactly twice in his life, both times on runs that had nearly gone sideways in ways neither of them talked about anymore. Emily Carter. And she doesn't know any of this is happening. Not yet. Cole made a low sound somewhere between a laugh and something more solemn. Man like that stops. For a woman like that, word's gonna spread, whether you push it or not. You know that, right? This isn't staying quiet. I know. You want it quiet? Marcus looked out the office window toward the lot where a dozen bikes sat gleaming under the desert sun and thought about Emily's face when he told her he wanted to pay her back, the flash of pride, the refusal, the fierce insistence that she hadn't helped him to be owed anything. No, Marcus said slowly. I don't think quiet does her justice. Back at the Sunrise Diner, Emily's world had not slowed down to accommodate the quiet storm building somewhere behind her back. Her mother, Diane Carter, had had a bad night, the kind that ended with Emily sitting on the edge of a hospital bed at 1 a.m, holding her mother's hand, while a monitor beeped out a rhythm too slow and too weak for comfort. You should be sleeping, Diane whispered, her voice thin, her eyes tired but still sharp enough to catch the exhaustion etched into her daughter's face. I'm fine, Mom. You're not fine. You've got the diner in 5 hours. I'll manage. Diane's fingers tightened weakly around Emily's hand. This isn't the life I wanted for you. Don't, Emily said quickly, her voice cracking on the single syllable. Don't do that. Don't apologize for being sick. That's not something you did to me. I'm watching you disappear a little more every month, Diane said, working yourself into the ground so I can keep breathing. That's not a fair trade, baby. Emily leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against her mother's hand. It's the only trade I've got, and I'd make it again every single time. The monitor beeped steadily between them, and neither of them said anything else for a long while because there wasn't anything left to say that wouldn't break the both of them wide open. By the time the sun came up, Emily was back at the diner, apron tied, coffee pot in hand, smiling at customers who had no idea that 4 hours earlier, she'd been terrified her mother wasn't going to make it through the night. Nobody at that diner knew what Emily carried. That was exactly how she wanted it. Marcus found out about the hospital visit 3 days later from Tiny, who'd made it his unofficial job to keep tabs on the Carter household without making it obvious he was doing so. "She looked bad, brother," Tiny said, sliding into the seat across from Marcus at the clubhouse bar. "One of the nurses at the front desk said Diane Carter's had 2 close calls this month already. Emily hasn't missed a single diner shift through any of it." Marcus felt something clench hard in his chest. How much longer can she keep doing that? "Not much," Tiny said quietly. "Nurse said the mother needs a procedure. Expensive one. Insurance is only covering part of it. The rest is coming out of Emily's pocket, and Emily's pocket is basically empty." Marcus sat with that for a long moment, turning his glass in slow circles the way he always did when something needed thinking through. "How much are we talking?" Tiny told him the number. Marcus didn't flinch, but something in his jaw went tight enough that Tiny noticed. "That's not something one chapter covers on its own," Tiny said. "No," Marcus agreed, "it's not." "So what do we do?" Marcus looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Tiny had seen only a handful of times in the years they'd ridden together, the look of a man who had made a decision and would not be talked out of it. "We make some calls," Marcus said. "Every chapter that owes us. Every brother who's ever needed somebody to show up when the whole world had already written them off. That's a lot of calls. Then we better start dialing." What happened over the following 2 weeks would later be described by more than one member of the Iron Horse chapter as the fastest, quietest mobilization any of them had ever seen, faster than a funeral run, faster than a defense op, faster than anything that wasn't born out of pure, uncomplicated loyalty. Hawk made the calls to chapter presidents, directly cutting through the usual small talk, with the kind of blunt honesty that only came from a man who'd earned the right to speak plainly. "There's a young woman," Hawk said again and again to president after president across 4 states. "She's carrying a weight that would break most people, and she's doing it without a single complaint, and she stopped to help one of ours when she had nothing left to give. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm telling you what's happening, and I'm telling you that Iron Horse intends to show up for her, and if your chapter wants to ride with us, the door's open." Every single president said yes. Some of them didn't even ask for details first. The story alone, a young woman handing her last water bottle to a stranger who terrified everyone else on that highway, was enough. It moved through the brotherhood the way certain stories do, picking up weight and momentum with every telling until men who had never met Emily Carter found themselves organizing days off work, fueling up bikes, checking maps for the fastest route into a small Arizona town none of them had ever had reason to visit before. Meanwhile, a smaller, quieter operation had begun inside the Iron Horse chapter itself, one that Marcus insisted on overseeing personally. "We're not just showing up with motorcycles and good intentions," he told Hawk one evening, laying out a legal pad covered in his own cramped handwriting. "She needs a car that isn't going to die on her. She needs her mother's medical bills handled, all of them, not just this one procedure, the whole backlog. And she needs to know once and for all that she's not carrying this alone anymore." Hawk studied the numbers Marcus had written down, whistled low. "You're talking about a serious amount of money, brother." "I know. You got a plan for raising that kind of number." Marcus's jaw set. "I've got 4 chapters and about 200 men who are about to find out exactly why this club still means something." Yeah. The plan came together in pieces, each one a small climax of its own, each one adding weight to something that had started with a single bottle of water on a forgotten highway. Reese, the youngest full-patch member of the chapter, took point on the fundraising, using contacts from a legitimate charity run the club had done years earlier to set up a proper fund, one that wouldn't just be cash handed over in an envelope, but something structured, something that could cover medical bills directly and keep coming if Diane's treatment required ongoing care. "We do this right," Reese said, presenting the plan to the assembled chapter on a Tuesday night. "Every dollar accounted for. Every brother who contributes gets a receipt. We're not doing this to look good. We're doing this because it needs doing, and we do it clean." Nobody argued. Within 4 days, contributions had come in from riders across 4 states, some large, most modest, all of it adding up faster than anybody had expected. A retired member out of Flagstaff who'd fallen out of touch with the club years earlier heard the story secondhand, and mailed in a check that made Hawk sit down hard when he opened the envelope. Man hasn't ridden with us in 6 years, Hawk said, staring at the number. Heard the story from a cousin of a prospect. Didn't even ask for details. Just wrote the check. That's what this story does to people, Marcus said quietly. It reminds them what they signed up for in the first place. Meanwhile, Tiny had taken on the vehicle problem, personally tracking down a reliable used sedan through a contact who owed him a favor from years back, negotiating the price down to something the fund could easily absorb, arranging for it to be detailed and fueled and ready the moment it was needed. She's not going to accept a gift like this easily, Tiny warned. Woman's got more pride than half the men in this club. I know, Marcus said. That's exactly why we're not asking permission. But even as the plan grew, bikes confirmed from 4 states, a fund quietly swelling past what anyone had predicted, a car sitting ready in Tiny's garage under a canvas cover. Marcus couldn't shake a nagging unease that had settled into his chest days earlier and refused to leave. He rode out to the diner again on a Thursday afternoon, telling himself it was just to check in, just to make sure Emily was holding up, though. By now, even he understood there was more to it than that. She looked worse than the last time he'd seen her, thinner around the face, dark circles that no amount of concealer could fully hide. When she saw him walk in, her exhausted smile flickered to life anyway. Automatic practice, the kind of smile that came from years of pretending things were fine for the sake of everyone around her. You again, she said, sliding a coffee cup in front of him before he had even sat down. People are going to start talking, Marcus. Let them talk. He studied her face carefully. You look tired, Emily. I'm always tired, comes with the job. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Emily's smile faded a fraction, and she glanced around the diner before lowering her voice. My mom had a rough night. We were at the hospital most of it. Marcus's stomach dropped. Is she okay? She's stable, for now. Emily's hands, Marcus noticed, were trembling slightly as she wiped down the counter that didn't need wiping. They want to run a procedure, expensive one. Insurance is only covering part of it, and I don't. She stopped herself abruptly, jaw tightening, like she'd caught herself saying more than she meant to. You don't have the rest, Marcus finished quietly. I'll figure it out, Emily said, too fast, too automatic. I always figure it out. What if you didn't have to this time? Emily's eyes snapped up to his, something sharp and wary flickering behind the exhaustion. Marcus, I told you already. I don't need. I know what you told me. Marcus kept his voice gentle, steady, the way he'd learned to talk down a scared brother in the middle of a crisis. I heard you the first time, but I need you to hear something too. Emily crossed her arms, bracing herself. What? You gave me water when you didn't have enough for yourself, Marcus said. You didn't ask if I deserved it. You didn't ask what I'd done to earn it. You just saw somebody who needed help, and you helped them, even though it cost you something real. He leaned forward slightly. That kind of person doesn't get to carry everything alone forever, Emily. Somebody's allowed to catch you too. For a long moment, Emily said nothing, her jaw working like she was fighting back something she didn't want him to see. You don't understand, she finally said, voice cracking slightly. If I let people start helping me, if I lean on that even a little, and then it goes away, or it's not enough, or something happens, I can't fall apart, Marcus. I don't get that luxury. My mom needs me standing. Nobody's asking you to fall apart, Marcus said softly. We're asking you to let somebody stand next to you for once. Emily's eyes were shining now, and she blinked hard, angry at herself for the reaction. Angry at how close she'd come to breaking down in the middle of a Tuesday lunch rush. I have customers, she said abruptly, turning away. Emily, I have customers, Marcus. Her voice was thick. Please. Marcus let her go, watching her disappear into the kitchen. With her shoulders squared too tight, too controlled, the posture of someone holding herself together through sheer force of will. He left a large tip on the counter again, and this time he didn't wait around for her to notice. That night, Marcus sat in the clubhouse office with Hawk turning the conversation over and over in his mind. She's not going to let us help her, he admitted. Not directly. Her pride's too strong, and honestly, I think it's the only thing holding her together right now. Hawk considered this for a long moment. Then we don't ask permission. That's what Tiny said too, because it's true. Hawk leaned forward. Some people, you ask them if they want help, and their pride answers before their need gets a word in. So you stop asking. You just show up and you let the moment do the convincing instead of the conversation. Marcus exhaled slowly. That's a hell of a gamble, Hawk. If this goes wrong, if she feels ambushed or pitied or like we've turned her into some kind of charity case in front of the whole town, then we make sure it doesn't feel like charity, Hawk said firmly. We make sure it feels like what it actually is, which is payment, Hawk said, long overdue and finally arriving. No. The days that followed moved with a strange electric momentum. Calls confirmed from Nevada, from New Mexico, from a chapter out of California that Marcus hadn't spoken to in almost 5 years, all converging toward a single date circled in red on Hawk's calendar. But it wasn't only logistics that kept Marcus up late into the night. It was Emily herself, the memory of her voice cracking in the diner, the fierce, brittle pride in her refusal, the fear underneath it that had nothing to do with motorcycles or money, and everything to do with a woman terrified of what would happen if she let herself need anyone at all. He found himself riding past her house more than once in the evenings, slowing just enough to see the porch light on the old sedan parked in the driveway, looking every bit as tired as its owner, before continuing on without stopping, because he didn't yet have the right words to explain why he kept showing up. It was on one of these evenings, 3 days before the date circled on Hawk's calendar, that everything nearly fell apart. Marcus's phone rang at 11 at night, and Tiny's voice on the other end was tight with an urgency that immediately set Marcus's nerves on edge. "We've got a problem," Tiny said. "What kind of problem?" "Emily's mother took a bad turn tonight. Ambulance called. They rushed her into emergency surgery, the procedure she needed, except now it's not scheduled. It's happening right now tonight because they didn't have a choice." Marcus was already grabbing his keys. "Is Emily there?" "She's at the hospital, alone." Tiny's voice dropped lower. "Brother, I don't think she's got anybody else to call." Marcus didn't remember much of the ride to the hospital, except the wind screaming past his helmet and the cold, sick fear sitting in his gut the entire way. Fear that had nothing to do with the plan, the fund, the car sitting under its canvas cover in Tiny's garage, and everything to do with the simple human terror of a young woman sitting alone in a waiting room while her mother's life hung in the balance. He found Emily exactly where he expected, a hard plastic chair, in a nearly empty waiting room, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped tight around herself, staring at nothing with the particular blankness of someone who had run out of tears hours ago and was simply waiting to see which way the night would break. She looked up when he walked in, and something in her face crumbled. The moment she saw him, not gratitude, not surprise, just pure, unguarded relief at not being alone anymore. "Marcus," her voice was barely a whisper. He crossed the room and sat down beside her without asking permission. And after a moment's hesitation, Emily leaned sideways until her head rested against his shoulder, and she let herself cry, really cry for the first time since he'd met her, the exhausted, silent kind of crying that came from a person who'd been holding too much for too long. "They wouldn't tell me anything," she whispered. "They just took her back and told me to wait, and I don't. Marcus, I don't know what I'll do if—" "Don't," Marcus said quietly, his voice rough. "Don't finish that sentence. Not yet." "I can't lose her," Emily said, barely audible. "She's all I have." Marcus didn't answer right away. He just sat there, letting her cry against his shoulder, feeling something in his chest tighten with a fierce, protective anger at a world that had let this woman carry so much for so long with nobody standing beside her. "You're not alone tonight," he finally said. "Whatever happens in there, you are not sitting in this waiting room by yourself. Not tonight, not ever again if I have anything to say about it." Emily didn't answer, but her hand found his on the armrest between them, and she held on like he was the only solid thing left in a night that had come apart at the seams. The surgery took 4 hours. Marcus stayed the entire time, and somewhere around hour 2, Hawk and Tiny showed up, too quiet, respectful, sitting a few chairs away, without pushing themselves into a moment that belonged to Emily. When the surgeon finally emerged, Emily shot to her feet so fast she nearly stumbled, and Marcus was right there beside her, steadying her without a word. "She's stable," the surgeon said, and the words hit the room like a held breath finally released. "The procedure went well. She's going to need recovery time, but barring complications, your mother's going to be okay." Emily made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and she turned instinctively toward Marcus, burying her face against his chest as relief tore through her body in waves. "She's okay," she whispered over and over. "She's okay." "She's okay," Marcus agreed quietly, holding her steady. Over Emily's shoulder, Marcus caught Hawk's eye, and something passed between the two men, a silent understanding that the plan, whatever it had been before, had just become something far more urgent, far more necessary than either of them had realized. Because Emily Carter had just come face to face with the exact thing she feared most, being left alone with an impossible weight, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she hadn't had to face it by herself. Diane Carter's recovery was slow but steady over the following week, and Emily split her time between double shifts at the diner and long hours at her mother's bedside, running on a combination of coffee, adrenaline, and sheer stubborn will. Marcus visited twice more during that week, each time bringing something small. A decent meal from somewhere other than hospital vending machines, a phone charger Emily had forgotten once. Simply his presence in a plastic chair beside her when the night shift nurses changed and the hospital went quiet and lonely in the particular way hospitals do after midnight. "You don't have to keep doing this," Emily told him one evening, her voice softer than the guarded edge she'd carried the first few times he'd shown up. "I know I don't have to," Marcus said. "I want to." Why? Marcus considered the question for a long moment. Because somebody showed me on a highway in the middle of nowhere that strangers are allowed to care about each other without expecting anything back. Figured it was worth learning that lesson properly. Emily's eyes softened, something in her guarded posture finally easing just slightly, just enough. "You're a strange man, Marcus Walker." "I've been told." She almost smiled, a real one, tired but genuine. And for a moment, sitting in that hospital hallway at nearly midnight, something passed between them that neither one of them had a name for yet, something built out of gratitude and exhaustion, and the particular intimacy that comes from surviving a crisis together. Neither of them knew that 6 miles away, in a garage behind the Iron Horse Clubhouse, a sedan sat gleaming under a canvas cover, keys already cut, paperwork already filed in Emily's name. Neither of them knew that a fund raised across 4 states now held enough to cover not just Diane's surgery, but months of follow-up care besides. And neither of them knew that within days, engines would begin gathering in towns across 3 states. Riders checking maps, chapters confirming final details. All of it building toward a single Saturday morning that would change the way an entire town looked at the men in leather vests forever. Emily thought the hardest part was already behind her. Her mother stable, the immediate crisis past. Life slowly, painfully returning to something resembling normal. She had no idea the biggest moment of all was still coming. And when it would arrive the way real gratitude always does, loud, unstoppable, and impossible to ignore. The Saturday morning arrived the way most turning points do, quietly disguised as an ordinary day, giving no warning of what it was about to become. Emily woke early out of habit rather than necessity. Her mother's recovery finally stable enough that the constant vigilance of the past 2 weeks had eased into something closer to normal worry. She made coffee. She checked on Diane, found her sleeping peacefully. Color back in her cheeks in a way that still made Emily's chest tighten with relief every time she noticed it. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, allowing herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, a few minutes of simply not bracing for the next disaster. She had no idea that 6 miles away, at the Iron Horse Clubhouse, more than 200 men were already checking their bikes for the ride of their lives. Marcus had barely slept. He stood in the clubhouse lot at 6 in the morning, running his hands over the Harley's tank out of nervous habit, watching the gravel lot fill steadily with machines that hadn't all come from the same state, some of them not even from the same direction. Cole rolled in first, his Barstow chapter arriving in a tight formation of 11 bikes engines idling low and rough in the cool morning air. "Told you it wouldn't stay quiet," Cole said, swinging off his bike and clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "How many are you?" Marcus asked. 11 from us. Word is Flagstaff's bringing 18. New Mexico chapter's already on the road, should roll in within the hour. Cole's eyes swept the gathering lot, already thick with more machines than Marcus had seen assembled in one place in years. "You started something bigger than one highway, brother." "Wasn't trying to start anything," Marcus said quietly. "Just trying to say thank you properly." Sometimes that's how the big things start. By 7:30, the lot outside the Iron Horse Clubhouse looked like something out of a rally poster, chapters from 4 states' engines, gleaming patches from clubs that didn't always see eye to eye, standing shoulder to shoulder for one shared purpose. Hawk moved through the crowd with the calm authority of a man who'd spent 30 years earning the right to lead exactly this kind of gathering, checking details, confirming the route, making sure every piece of the plan Marcus and Tiny had built over the past 2 weeks was locked into place. "Cars fueled and ready," Tiny confirmed. walking over with a clipboard that looked comically formal next to his leather vest and tattooed forearms. Fund total came in higher than we projected, enough to cover Diane's entire medical debt past and future, plus a cushion for Emily. Besides, how much of a cushion? Marcus asked. Tiny told him the number, and Marcus actually stopped walking for a second. 240 riders, Hawk said, coming up beside them, surveying the lot with something like quiet pride. 4 states, all of it because one woman gave a stranger her last bottle of water and didn't ask for anything in return. She's going to be terrified, Marcus said quietly, glancing at the sheer size of what they'd built. 240 motorcycles rolling into her street unannounced, brother. That's not a gentle surprise. That's an army showing up. Then we make sure the first thing she sees isn't the army, Hawk said. She sees you first. Everybody else follows behind. Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what was about to happen settle heavier across his shoulders with every passing minute. At 9 that morning, Emily left for the diner driving the same tired sedan that had somehow survived one more week. Her mother resting comfortably at home under the watch of a neighbor. Emily trusted a retired school teacher named Carol, who'd been quietly checking in on the Carters for years without ever making a fuss about it. The diner was busy with the Saturday breakfast crowd, and Emily fell into her usual rhythm coffee orders, the automatic warmth she extended to every customer, regardless of how tired she felt underneath it. She had no reason to suspect anything unusual about the day. No reason to notice the way her regulars kept glancing toward the window every few minutes, or the way old Frank in the corner booth kept checking his watch like he was waiting for something. What Emily didn't know was that Frank had gotten a call an hour earlier from Carol, who'd gotten a call from Tiny, who'd made absolutely sure that half the regulars at that diner would be present and watching when the moment finally arrived. Word, it turned out, traveled through small towns just as fast as it traveled through motorcycle clubs. The convoy rolled out of the Iron Horse Clubhouse at 10 in the morning, and the sound of it, 240 engines igniting almost in unison, was something that made even Hawk, a man who'd led dozens of rides in his life, feel a chill crawl up the back of his neck. They didn't head for the diner first. That had been Marcus's one firm request insisted upon days earlier when Hawk had first sketched out the route. She's off shift at 2, Marcus had said. House first. I want her walking outside to find this on her own street, in her own home, not standing behind a diner counter in front of strangers. So the convoy moved instead toward the small rented house on the edge of town, engines thundering low and steady through streets that had never seen anything like it. Neighbors stepping out onto porches in confusion and then awe as motorcycle after motorcycle rolled past, more of them than anyone could easily count, patches from clubs whose names most people only half recognize from movies and news stories. None of it looking anything like the danger those names usually implied. Carol, watching from the Carter's front window with Diane resting on the couch behind her, felt her breath catch in her throat. Diane, she said slowly, you need to see this. Diane, stayed weak from surgery, but alert enough to understand the sound building outside her window, pushed herself upright with effort. What in the world? I think, Carol said, voice trembling with something between disbelief and joy. Your daughter's about to have the best day of her life. Emily's shift ended at 2, exactly on schedule, and she drove home with the windows down, enjoying a rare moment of quiet before she'd need to relieve Carol and settle back in for another evening of caretaking. She turned onto her street and immediately knew something was wrong, or not wrong exactly, but deeply, overwhelmingly unfamiliar. Motorcycles lined both sides of the road as far as she could see, dozens of them. Then as she continued driving slowly forward, hundreds. Neighbors stood on their lawns, phones raised, murmuring to each other in tones of confused wonder rather than fear. The rumble of idling engines vibrated through her car's frame, even with the windows rolled up. Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her heart suddenly hammering. What is happening? She whispered to herself, easing the car forward at a crawl, scanning the crowd with rising panic that had nothing to do with fear of the bikers themselves and everything to do with sheer, overwhelming confusion. Then she saw him. Marcus stood near the front of the crowd directly outside her house, dressed in the same worn leather vest she'd first seen him in on that highway, and the moment their eyes met through her windshield, Emily felt something in her chest crack wide open. She parked crookedly at the curb, barely remembering to put the car in park before she stumbled out, legs unsteady beneath her. Marcus, she said, voice shaking. What is this? What's going on? Marcus walked toward her, slowly removing his sunglasses, and behind him the crowd of riders fell into an almost reverent silence, engines cutting off one by one, until the street held nothing but the sound of Emily's own frightened breathing and the wind moving softly through 200 parked motorcycles. "You stopped for me," Marcus said, "when the entire world drove past and pretended not to see me." Emily's eyes filled with tears she didn't understand yet. "Today," Marcus continued, voice thick with emotion he made no effort to hide, "we came back to stop for you, monsieur." For a long moment, Emily simply couldn't speak. She stood on her own front lawn, staring at a wall of motorcycles and leather-clad riders that stretched further than she could clearly see, her mind refusing to fully process what was happening. "I don't understand," she finally managed. "Marcus, why are there so many?" "Because your story didn't stay in one clubhouse," Marcus said gently. "It traveled. 4 states, Emily. 240 riders who heard what you did for a stranger and couldn't just sit still knowing about it." Behind him, Hawk stepped forward, and beside Hawk, Tiny pulled the canvas cover off something parked at the curb that Emily hadn't even noticed in her shock. A sedan, clean and gleaming, keys already resting on the dashboard, visible through the window. "That's yours," Hawk said simply. "Title's already transferred. No strings, no conditions, just something reliable so you're not out on that highway again, wondering if your car is going to make it home." Emily's hand flew to her mouth, a sound escaping her that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "I can't accept that," she whispered automatically, old pride flaring even through the shock. That's too much, I can't." "You can," Marcus said firmly. "Emily, you already gave everything you had to a stranger. Let somebody give something back for once." But there was more, and Emily's legs nearly gave out when Tiny stepped forward with a folder that Reese had prepared meticulously over the past 2 weeks. "Your mother's medical debt," Tiny said quietly. "All of it. Past bills, the surgery, ongoing follow-up care for the next year. Covered. Every dollar of it." Emily stared at the folder in Tiny's hands, like it might disappear if she looked away. "That's not possible," she whispered. Do you know how much that is? That's not something 200 people just..." 240, Hawk corrected gently. "And yes, we know exactly how much it is. We raised it in 12 days, Emily, because every single person we told your story to understood immediately why it mattered." Emily's knees finally buckled, and Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, holding her steady, as sobs finally broke free of the composure she'd maintained through weeks of crisis and exhaustion and quiet private terror. "Why?" she gasped between sobs, clutching at his vest. "Why would anyone do this for me? I didn't do anything special. I just gave you water." Marcus held her firmly, his own voice rough with emotion. "You gave me back my humanity on a highway when the whole world had reduced me to something to be afraid of. That's not small, Emily. That's the biggest thing anybody's done for me in 19 years riding with this club." The crowd of neighbors watching from their lawns had gone completely silent. Phones still raised, capturing a moment none of them fully understood yet, but somehow recognized as significant, a moment that would circulate through the small town for months afterward, told and retold until it became something close to local legend. Carol emerged from the house with Diane leaning heavily on her arm, both of them stopping short at the sight, spread across the lawn and street. "Mom," Emily choked out, pulling free of Marcus's steadying grip to rush toward her mother. "Mom, do you see this? Do you understand what's happening?" Diane, weak but alert, looked out at the sea of motorcycles and leather-clad riders with an expression of pure, disbelieving wonder. "I think," she said slowly, voice trembling, "I think the world just decided to pay you back, baby." Emily wrapped her arms carefully around her mother, both of them crying now, and around them the assembled riders watched with expressions that ranged from quiet satisfaction to open, unashamed emotion. Men who'd spent years being feared and misunderstood, finally witnessing firsthand exactly what it felt like when kindness came back around in full. But the day held one more turn nobody had fully prepared for, and it arrived precisely when Marcus stepped forward to address the crowd of riders and neighbors, both intending only to explain a little more of what had brought 240 men to this quiet residential street. 14 days ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "I was standing on a highway with a dead bike and a phone with 1 bar of signal, and I want every person here to understand something plainly. Nobody stopped. Cars passed me for over an hour. Families slowed down just enough to stare and then sped away like I might reach out and grab them through the windshield." He paused, looking directly at Emily. Then this woman pulled over, alone, in the middle of nowhere, for a stranger who by every reasonable measure should have terrified her. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. She gave me the last bottle of water she had, Marcus continued. I found out later she was driving home on fumes, that she'd spent her last dollars that morning on her mother's medication, that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in longer than she'd admit to anyone. And she still stopped, still helped, still treated a stranger like a human being when she had every reason in the world to look out only for herself. Emily was openly crying now, unable to look away from him. That's not an accident, Marcus said, voice rising with conviction. That's not luck, that's character. That's the kind of person this world doesn't deserve and desperately needs more of. He turned to address the riders directly. We didn't come here today to give Emily Carter charity. We came here to pay a debt owed to every ounce of kindness she's shown people who never even noticed her sacrifice. The crowd of riders erupted into applause and revving engines, a wall of sound that shook windows up and down the street, and Emily stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed, sobbing, held upright by her mother on one side and Marcus's steady hand on the other. It was in the middle of this celebration, as neighbors began cautiously approaching to shake hands with riders they'd feared moments earlier, as Tiny and Reese began organizing the paperwork transfer for the car, with Emily's shaking signature, that Cole pulled Marcus aside with an expression that immediately put Marcus on alert. Got something you need to hear, Cole said quietly, glancing toward Emily to make sure she was occupied. One of my prospects did some digging this week, background stuff. Nothing invasive, just making sure everything checked out clean before we showed up here today. And Emily's father, Cole said, he's not dead like she's told people. He's alive, living 2 towns over, and word is he skipped out on medical bills and child support both years back, right around the time Diane first got diagnosed. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. She thinks he's gone. She tells people he passed away when she was a teenager, Cole said. But my prospect found a current address. Man's living comfortably 40 minutes from here, remarried, doing just fine for himself, while his ex-wife and daughter nearly lost everything trying to survive without him. Marcus's jaw tightened, a slow simmering anger building behind his eyes. Does Emily know he's alive? That's the thing, Cole said grimly, and according to the paperwork my prospect found, Emily's tried reaching out to him twice over the past 2 years, asking for help with her mother's medical bills. Both times he ignored her. Marcus looked back across the lawn, where Emily stood laughing through tears, surrounded by riders who'd traveled hundreds of miles for a woman most of them had never met, and something in his chest twisted violently at the unfairness of it, that the one man who owed her everything had turned his back completely, while 200 strangers had shown up without being asked. Don't say anything to her today, Marcus said quietly. Not today. Let her have this. And after today? Marcus's eyes hardened with a resolve Cole recognized immediately, the look of a man who'd just found a new debt that needed settling. After today, Marcus said, we're going to have a conversation with her father. But that was a problem for another day. For now, the street outside Emily Carter's small rented house remained full of engines and laughter, and the particular overwhelming joy of watching a woman who'd spent years believing she was invisible finally understand in the most undeniable way possible exactly how deeply she mattered. Emily wiped her eyes, turned back toward the crowd of riders who'd traveled from 4 states to stand on her lawn, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself simply feel it, the astonishing, overwhelming truth that kindness given freely had come back to her, 100-fold carried on the backs of motorcycles she never could have imagined arriving in her life. She had no idea yet that the day's revelations weren't finished. She had no idea that somewhere 40 minutes away, a man who'd abandoned her years ago was about to receive a visit he never saw coming. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. Long after the crowd had dispersed, after the last engine had rumbled off into the dark and Emily had gone inside to sit with her mother, in stunned, grateful silence, he lay awake turning Cole's words over and over in his mind. Emily's father was alive, living comfortably 2 towns over, ignoring 2 direct requests for help while his ex-wife nearly died and his daughter worked herself to exhaustion trying to save her alone. Marcus had spent 19 years learning that some wounds weren't his to fix, but this one sat differently in his chest, and by morning he had made a decision he hadn't fully run past Hawk yet. You're not thinking straight, Hawk said when Marcus finally laid it out over coffee at the clubhouse. You want to ride out to this man's house and do what exactly? Talk to him. Talk to him. Hawk's eyebrows rose. Marcus, I've known you 19 years. I know what your version of talking looks like when you're this angry. I'm not going to have to touch him, Marcus said flatly. I'm not going to threaten him. I just want him to look me in the eye and explain how he sleeps at night, knowing his daughter almost lost her mother because he wouldn't answer a phone call. Hawk studied him for a long moment, weighing the request against everything he knew about the man across from him. Does Emily know you found this out? Not yet. You planning on telling her? Marcus hesitated. I don't know, maybe. Depends what happens. Hawk exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his beard. All right, but you're not going alone and you're not going in looking like you're about to burn the man's house down. We do this calm. We do this clean. You hear me? I hear you. I mean it, Marcus. This isn't about revenge. This is about Emily. Everything we do from here needs to serve her, not your temper. Marcus nodded slowly, though the anger sitting low in his gut hadn't cooled even slightly. They rode out that afternoon, Marcus, Hawk, and Cole, 3 bikes instead of 240, a deliberate choice meant to signal conversation rather than confrontation. The address led them to a modest but well-kept house in a quiet subdivision 40 minutes outside town, the kind of place with manicured lawns and matching mailboxes that told Marcus everything he needed to know about the comfortable life Emily's father had built for himself, while his daughter counted pennies for medication. A man in his 50s answered the door, silver-haired, soft around the middle, wearing the kind of casual weekend clothes that spoke of a life without financial worry. His easy expression flickered into wariness the moment he took in the 3 men standing on his porch. Can I help you? He asked carefully. Are you Richard Carter? Marcus asked. The man's jaw tightened slightly. Who's asking? My name's Marcus Walker. This is Hawk and this is Cole. We're friends of your daughter, Emily. Richard's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, recognition, and finally something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. I don't have anything to say to you, he said, starting to close the door. Marcus's hand came up, not forceful, just steady, holding the door open without pushing it further. We're not here to cause trouble, Richard. We just want 5 minutes. I don't know what she told you, Richard said, voice defensive now, but whatever's going on in her life isn't my responsibility anymore. That ended a long time ago. Did it end before or after she called you asking for help paying her mother's medical bills? Hawk asked quietly. Richard's face went pale. Because we know about that, Marcus said. 2 calls, 2 times she swallowed whatever pride she had left and asked her own father for help while her mother was dying by inches, and twice, you didn't answer. You don't know anything about my situation. Richard snapped, though the anger in his voice sounded thinner than he probably intended. Diane and I have history you don't understand. We're not here about you and Diane, Marcus cut in, voice hardening slightly. We're here about Emily, your daughter, 27 years old, working 2 jobs, sitting alone in a hospital waiting room 3 weeks ago, wondering if her mother was going to survive the night while you sat in this house. Richard's composure cracked slightly, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been shame if he'd let it surface fully. I have my own family now, he said, quieter. My own life. It's complicated. It's not complicated, Marcus said. It's simple. Your daughter needed you and you weren't there. That's the whole story. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Richard stood in his doorway, caught between defensiveness and something closer to buried guilt, while 3 men who had no legal claim on him whatsoever stood on his porch waiting. What do you want from me? Richard finally asked, voice tight. Money, is that what this is? You want me to write a check to make you go away? We didn't come here for your money, Marcus said. We already covered everything Emily needed. Every bill, every debt. Strangers did that, Richard. 240 men who'd never even met her because she showed one of us kindness on a highway, and it turned out that kind of person is rare enough to be worth showing up for. Richard's throat worked visibly. So no, Marcus continued, voice low and steady. We're not here for your money. We're here because a man should know what he threw away. Emily built a life out of nothing, took care of her mother without a single complaint, and gave everything she had left to a stranger who needed it more than she did. And you, Marcus said, letting the words land slowly, deliberately, you got to watch all of that from a comfortable distance and decide it wasn't your problem. Richard's eyes had gone glassy, and for a moment Marcus thought the man might actually break down right there on his porch. I didn't know it was that bad, Richard said quietly. I told myself Diane was exaggerating, that Emily was fine. I told myself a lot of things to make it easier to stay away. Well, now you know, Hawk said, not unkindly but without any softness either. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. We're not here to force a reunion neither of them asked for. We're just making sure you understand exactly what your absence cost in case you ever wondered. Richard stood silently for a long moment, staring past the three men toward the street, toward the direction of a town he'd deliberately avoided for years. Does Emily know you came here? He finally asked. Not yet, Marcus said. Are you going to tell her? Marcus considered the question carefully. That's up to you. If you want to reach out to her yourself, do it because you mean it, not because three strangers showed up on your porch and guilted you into it. She's rebuilt her whole life without you. She doesn't need a performance. She needs the truth if you've got it in you to give her that. They rode away without further confrontation, and the ride back into town passed largely in silence, each man processing the visit in his own way. You think he'll actually reach out? Cole asked once they'd stopped for gas. Don't know, Marcus admitted. Don't know if it even matters at this point. Emily built her whole life around the idea that she only has her mother. Maybe that's healthier than hoping for something from a man who already proved what he's capable of. You did the right thing, Hawk said. Not for revenge, for truth. Sometimes that's enough. Marcus wasn't entirely convinced, but he let it go because there was something more immediate weighing on him. A conversation with Emily he'd been putting off for 2 days, one that involved considerably less anger and considerably more uncertainty than the one he'd just had with her father. He found Emily at the diner 2 days later, her shift winding down the late afternoon light, catching the exhaustion still etched faintly around her eyes despite the very real relief that had settled into her posture since the day the riders had shown up. You've been quiet, Emily said, sliding into the booth across from him during her break. Everything okay? Marcus hesitated, weighing how much to say. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I did it because I care about you, not because I thought it was my place. Emily's brow furrowed. You're scaring me a little. I found out your father's alive, Marcus said quietly, living 2 towns over, and I went to see him. Emily went very still, color draining slightly from her face. I know I overstepped, Marcus said quickly. I know it wasn't my business, and if you're angry, you have every right to be. But I found out he'd ignored you twice when you reached out for help with your mom's bills, and something about that made me furious in a way I couldn't just sit on. Emily's hands had curled into fists on the table, her jaw tight. You had no right. I know. You don't understand what that man did to us, Emily said, voice shaking now low and fierce. You don't understand what it cost me to even make those calls, to swallow every ounce of pride I had left and ask him for help and to hear nothing back. Nothing, Marcus. Not even a text telling me to go to hell. I understand you're angry, Marcus said carefully. I understand I crossed a line. I'm not asking you to forgive me for it. I just didn't want you finding out later that I knew and kept it from you. Emily's eyes filled with tears she fought hard to hold back. What did he say? Marcus recounted the conversation carefully, honestly, without softening Richard's defensiveness or his own anger, without pretending the visit had produced some neat, satisfying resolution. He said it's complicated, Marcus finished. He said he didn't know how bad things had gotten. Whether that's true or just something he tells himself to sleep at night, I couldn't say. Emily was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her clenched hands. You know what the worst part is? She finally said, voice cracking. Some small, stupid part of me still hoped that someday he'd show up, that he'd realize what he walked away from and try to fix it. She wiped angrily at her eyes. And now I find out he knew. He knew we were struggling, and he chose his comfortable life over calling his own daughter back. I'm sorry, Marcus said quietly. I shouldn't have gone without asking you first. Emily looked up at him, and beneath the anger, something softer flickered through an exhausted, grudging gratitude that she clearly hadn't expected to feel. No, she said slowly. I'm angry you didn't ask, but I'm not angry you went. She wiped her eyes again, steadier this time. Nobody's ever gone to bat for me like that before, Marcus. Not once in my whole life, even when it wasn't your place. That's kind of become a pattern with me lately. Marcus said, a faint, careful smile touching his mouth. Showing up places uninvited on your behalf. Emily let out a shaky laugh despite herself. Yeah, I noticed. The following week brought a strange, unexpected turn that neither Marcus nor Emily saw coming, arriving in the form of a plain envelope left in Emily's mailbox with no return address, though the handwriting on the front was unmistakably careful and deliberate. The kind of handwriting belonging to someone who'd rewritten the letter inside more than once before finally deciding to send it. Emily opened it alone, sitting on her porch steps in the evening light, and read 3 pages written in her father's hand, an apology that didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't attempt to explain away the years of silence, didn't try to justify the 2 ignored phone calls that had nearly cost Emily everything. He wrote that he'd been a coward. That comfort had made him weak in ways he was ashamed to admit. That he didn't expect anything from her. Not a relationship, not forgiveness, not even a reply. Only that she know for whatever it was worth, that leaving had never stopped haunting him, and that the men who'd shown up on his porch had simply forced him to finally say the truth he'd been avoiding for years. Enclosed in the envelope was a check made out to Emily directly for an amount that made her hands shake when she saw it. She didn't cash it that night. She sat with it for a long time, feeling a complicated tangle of anger and grief in something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't quite nothing either. When Marcus stopped by later that evening, she showed him the letter without a word, watching his face carefully as he read it. "You don't have to decide what to feel about this right now," Marcus said, finally folding the letter carefully and handing it back to her. "You don't owe him quick forgiveness just because he finally said something true." "I know," Emily said quietly, "but I think I'm allowed to be glad he said it anyway, even years too late." "You're allowed to feel whatever you actually feel," Marcus said. "Nobody gets to tell you the right way to process this." Emily nodded slowly, tucking the letter away, and for a long moment the 2 of them sat together in comfortable silence on the porch steps, the events of the past month settling slowly into something that finally resembled peace. Word of the gathering had by now spread far beyond the town itself. A local news station had picked up footage one of the neighbors had recorded that Saturday morning, and within days the story of the Hells Angels who'd raised money across 4 states for a struggling diner waitress had begun circulating well beyond anything Marcus or Hawk had anticipated. "You're famous," Reese told Marcus one evening at the clubhouse, grinning as he scrolled through comments on a video that had accumulated views faster than any of them expected. "People are calling it the best thing they have seen all year." "Wasn't trying to be famous," Marcus said, "just trying to pay a debt." "Doesn't matter what you were trying to do," Hawk said, joining them with a rare, satisfied smile. "People needed to see this, needed to be reminded that this brotherhood isn't what half the world assumes it is." Marcus glanced towards his phone where a message from Emily sat waiting, and something in his chest eased at the simple, ordinary comfort of it. A woman checking in on a Tuesday evening. No crisis attached, just the quiet, growing warmth of 2 people who'd found each other through circumstances neither of them could have predicted. He had no idea that the story building around them, the viral footage, the swelling public attention, the slow, careful reconciliation forming between Emily and a father who'd finally found his courage too late, was only the beginning of something even larger. Because somewhere in the wave of attention the video had generated, a local business owner had seen the footage and recognized an opportunity neither Marcus nor Emily had considered, yet one that would change not just Emily's life, but the entire town's relationship with the club that had once made every resident cross to the other side of the street. The business owner's name was Louise Hartman, and she'd watched the video 4 times before she picked up her phone. She owned the Sunrise Diner, had owned it for 11 years, ever since her husband passed and left her the building along with a mortgage she'd spent a decade slowly paying down through early mornings and short-staffed weekends. She'd watched Emily Carter work herself to exhaustion for 3 of those years, had quietly slipped her extra shifts whenever she could, had worried more than once about the girl's health without ever quite knowing how to help beyond the small gestures a diner owner could manage. Watching 240 motorcycles fill a residential street for her waitress had done something to Louise that she hadn't expected. It had made her ashamed of how little she'd been able to offer and determined to change that. She called Marcus directly, having gotten his number from Tiny through a mutual acquaintance, neither of them fully explained. "I want to do something for Emily," Louise said without much preamble. "Something real. Not a raise, not a bonus. Something that actually changes her situation." "I'm listening," Marcus said. "I want to make her manager," Louise said. "The diner's turning 15 next year. I've been thinking about retiring for a while now, and I don't have kids interested in taking over. Emily's worked there longer than anyone. She knows the business better than I do most days, and she treats every single customer like they matter. Louise's voice caught slightly. I want to give her a path to eventually owning the place outright. Structured buyout fair terms. Something that actually builds her a future instead of just paying her by the hour for the rest of her life. Marcus sat with that for a long moment, feeling something warm spread through his chest. That's not a small offer, Louise. I know exactly how large it is, Louise said. I've been sitting on it for years, honestly not sure who deserved it. Watching that video answered the question for me. Emily's reaction when Louise sat her down 2 days later to explain the offer in full mirrored almost exactly the disbelief she'd shown standing on her own lawn surrounded by motorcycles. The same instinctive refusal, the same fierce insistence that she hadn't done anything to deserve this kind of generosity. Louise, I can't take over the diner, Emily said, hands trembling around her coffee cup. I don't have the money for a buyout. I don't have the business training. You've been running half the operational decisions here for 2 years without a title, Louise said firmly. You know the suppliers, you know the regulars, you know how to keep this place profitable during a slow season, better than I do most weeks. The training you'll pick up, the money we'll structure as a low-interest note paid out of the diner's own profits over time, so you're not writing a check you don't have. Louise reached across the table and took Emily's shaking hands in her own. I'm not offering you a charity, sweetheart. I'm offering you what you've already earned. Oh, it's lady. Emily's eyes filled with tears for what felt like the 100th time in 2 weeks, though these tears carried a different weight than the ones before, less relief, more something like hope finally allowed to exist without guilt attached to it. Why is everyone suddenly... Emily's voice broke. Why is all of this happening at once? For years, nothing happened. For years, I just survived day by day, and now the world caught up to what you'd been doing quietly the whole time, Louise said gently. That's not luck, Emily. That's overdue recognition. News of Emily's promotion spread through town almost as quickly as the story of the motorcycle gathering had, and the two stories together began to shift something in the collective consciousness of a town that had for years viewed the Hells Angels patch with the same reflexive suspicion as every other small town in America. Marcus noticed the change first in small, quiet ways. A gas station attendant who used to avoid eye contact now nodded when Marcus filled up his tank. A mother at the grocery store who once would have steered her cart in a wide arc around him now let her son wave shyly at him from the cereal aisle. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made headlines, but something real. Nonetheless, the slow, patient work of a reputation being rebuilt. One interaction at a time. You feel that? Tiny asked one afternoon, the two of them sitting outside the clubhouse watching the traffic pass on the road below. Feel what? People aren't looking at us the same way anymore. Tiny nodded toward a passing car whose driver lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in an easy, casual greeting. Used to be nobody made eye contact around here. Now half the town treats us like neighbors instead of a threat. Marcus considered this quietly. Funny how one woman with a bottle of water managed something 19 years of good behavior on our part never quite accomplished. That's the thing about kindness, Tiny said. People trust it more than they trust reputation management. She proved something true about us that we couldn't have proven ourselves no matter how many charity runs we organized. Diane's recovery continued steadily through the following weeks. Color returning fully to her face, strength slowly rebuilding under careful medical supervision that no longer came with the constant financial terror that had shadowed every appointment for the past 2 years. She'd started attending Emily's shifts at the diner, occasionally sitting in a corner booth with a book, simply enjoying the novel sensation of having nowhere urgent to be and nothing catastrophic to worry about. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Diane finally asked Emily the question that had been sitting between them since the letter arrived. Have you decided what you're going to do about your father? Diane asked carefully, watching Emily's face for any sign of how deep the wound still ran. Emily was quiet for a long moment, wiping down a table that didn't need wiping, the same nervous habit Marcus had noticed in her from their very first conversation. I don't think I'm ready to see him, Emily finally said. Not yet, maybe not for a long time, but I wrote him back. Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. What did you say? I told him I appreciated the honesty even years too late, Emily said. I told him I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but I wasn't going to pretend the letter didn't mean something either. She set down her rag, meeting her mother's eyes steadily. I told him that whatever relationship exists between us now, If any has to be built slow, and it has to be built by him showing up consistently, not just writing one letter and calling it fixed. Diane reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. That's more grace than I could have managed at your age. I learned it recently, Emily said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. Turns out watching 200 strangers show up for me changed my whole idea of what people are capable of, even people who disappointed me before. Marcus and Emily's relationship, meanwhile, had continued its slow, careful evolution from gratitude into something neither of them had expected, but both had quietly begun to hope for. He showed up at the diner most days now, not out of obligation, but out of a simple, growing preference for spending time in her orbit. She'd started riding on the back of his Harley on quiet Sunday afternoons, learning to trust the machine and the man both in equal measure. You know people are talking about us, Emily said one evening, sitting beside him on the tailgate of Tiny's truck outside the clubhouse, watching the sun drop low over the desert. Let them talk, Marcus said, echoing words she'd once said to him in the diner. Half this town owes you their newly discovered faith in humanity. I think we've earned a little gossip. Emily laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder, and Marcus felt something settle deep and permanent in his chest, the sense of a life reorganizing itself around a purpose he hadn't known he was missing until a bottle of water on a forgotten highway had shown it to him. Can I ask you something? Emily said quietly. Anything. Do you regret it? She asked. Everything this set off. The fundraising, the confrontation with my father, the way your whole club's reputation got tangled up in one highway stop that could have just stayed small and private. Marcus considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things that mattered. No, he said finally. Not for a single second. You want to know why? Why? Because for 19 years, I believe people only saw the vest, the ink, the reputation, Marcus said. I believe kindness from strangers was something that happened to other people, not men like me. You proved that wrong on a highway in the middle of nowhere, and everything that happened after the writers, the fund, your father Louise's offer, all of it exists because you refused to let fear decide who deserved help. He turned to look at her directly. That's not a small thing, Emily. That's the biggest thing that's happened to me in almost 2 decades of riding with this brotherhood. The final turning point arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, almost 2 months after the gathering, when Emily stood behind the counter of the Sunrise Diner. Her diner, now the paperwork finalized the week before Louise's name, slowly transitioning off the deed as the buyout terms took effect, and looked out over a dining room full of regulars who'd watched her grow from an exhausted young waitress into someone the whole town had come to respect. Marcus sat at the counter, same seat he always took, watching her move through the morning rush with a confidence that hadn't existed in her posture 2 months earlier. Look at you, he said when she finally paused long enough to pour his coffee. Diner owner, local legend, woman who apparently reformed an entire motorcycle club's public image without even trying. I didn't do any of that on purpose, Emily said, though her smile carried none of the guarded exhaustion it once had. I just gave a thirsty man some water. That's the thing about kindness, Marcus said, echoing Tiny's words from weeks earlier without quite realizing it. It doesn't ask permission before it changes everything. Emily set down the coffee pot, studying him for a long moment. You know what I've realized watching all of this unfold? What's that? I spent years believing that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, stayed invisible enough, eventually things would get easier, Emily said. But that's not what actually saved us. What saved us was one moment of choosing to see somebody else's pain instead of just managing my own. She reached across the counter, taking his hand. You taught me that lesson back without even realizing it. Every time you showed up at this diner, every time you sat in that hospital waiting room, every time you stood on my lawn and told 200 strangers why I mattered, you were teaching me that being seen isn't something you have to earn through suffering. Sometimes it just requires somebody willing to stop. Marcus held her hand, feeling the weight of everything that had built between them over 2 short months. A debt of water repaid 1,000 times over a fractured family, slowly and perfectly mending an entire town's understanding of brotherhood and leather vests and inked arms, rewritten by the simple, undeniable proof of what real loyalty looked like in action. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you saved more than just me that day on the highway. I think you saved every one of us who showed up believing kindness was still worth the risk. Outside the diner window, the desert sun climbed steadily into a clear Arizona sky. The same relentless heat that had once nearly cost Marcus his life, now simply another ordinary morning, in a town that had learned slowly and permanently to look past leather and ink and see the people underneath. Diane sat in her usual corner booth, healthy and steady, watching her daughter run the business she'd once feared would collapse under the weight of medical bills and exhaustion. Hawken, Tiny, and Reese filtered in throughout the morning regulars, now themselves greeted by name, treated like neighbors instead of threats. And somewhere on a quiet highway outside town, cars passed every single day now, without slowing down for anyone in particular, most drivers never knowing that one ordinary stretch of asphalt had once witnessed the beginning of something that would ripple outward across 4 states and change an entire community's understanding of who deserved compassion and who didn't. Emily Carter had given away her last bottle of water on a day when she had nothing left to spare, expecting nothing in return, believing simply that a stranger in need deserved to be seen. And in the end, that single quiet act of kindness had come back to her exactly the way it always should not, as a debt collected, but as proof undeniable and complete that in a world quick to judge people by their appearance and their reputation, the truest measure of a person had always been the courage to stop when everyone else kept driving. That truth never changed and it never would.